I'm Mavis Ryan, 38 years old, and for as long as I can remember, I've been the quiet backbone holding my family's chaos together. By profession, I'm a financial analyst, someone who thrives in numbers, spreadsheets, and logic. But at home, my role is far less glamorous. I'm the invisible accountant, the silent problem solver, the one who keeps the bills paid and the debts managed, usually without so much as a thank you. It's a position I've settled into over the years, partly out of love and partly out of necessity, because in the Ryan family, things rarely run smoothly on their own. This year's holiday party was no different. The house buzzed with the familiar mix of laughter, clinking glasses, and the low hum of family voices blending together in that unique kind of chaos only a big family gathering can create. The air smelled of cinnamon and pine from the overly ambitious decorations my mother had insisted upon, and somewhere in the kitchen, the oven timer chimed, signaling the turkey was done. Behind the festive veneer, though, there was always that undercurrent of tension, a delicate dance of unspoken grievances and fractured relationships wrapped up in forced smiles. Dad was in his element, standing tall by the fireplace, his voice booming louder than the holiday playlist as he regaled anyone who would listen about Lauren's new business venture. Lauren, my younger sister, was the golden child, charming, entitled, and always the center of Dad's proudest boasts. It's a solid $150,000 investment, and I'm telling you, this one will pay off, he declared, chuckling with a confidence that felt reckless to me. I watched the way people nodded along, eyes glazed over, caught up in Dad's charisma rather than the reality of the risk. Mom floated nearby, her smile practiced and tight, ready to smooth over any rough edges. She has always been a master of deflection, quick to excuse Dad's missteps with a gentle, "It's just a mistake, dear," or, "We all make them, don't we?" Her words were meant to keep the peace, but they often felt like a veil covering deeper cracks. And then there was me, standing just off to the side, a glass of wine in hand, forcing a smile as I listened to the usual banter. I could feel the weight of their expectations pressing on me, heavier than the holiday sweaters and sparkling lights. I was the one running the family's finances quietly behind the scenes, balancing accounts, managing debts, juggling payments. It was a thankless job, but one I took on without complaint. After all, someone had to be the adult in the room. Despite the laughter and cheer, I noticed the familiar pattern unfolding. Dad's enthusiasm for Lauren's projects was boundless, while my own requests for support or recognition were met with polite nods or outright dismissal. I kept my mouth shut, biting back the frustration that simmered beneath my calm exterior. I wanted to believe that this year would be different, that maybe the sacrifices I'd made, the extra hours worked, the personal money lent to keep things afloat, would finally earn me a place of respect and appreciation at this table. But then Dad laughed, loud, careless, and a little too dismissive, when someone mentioned the $150,000 Lauren's latest venture had cost the family. "Just a mistake," he said, waving his hand like it was no big deal. Mom chimed in with a soft, "It's fine, really. Accidents happen." Their words hung in the air like a challenge, a subtle message that my concerns were overblown, that my efforts to hold them accountable were misplaced. For a moment, I felt a tight knot form in my chest, the familiar sting of being unseen, unheard. Years of support, of quiet endurance, dismissed in a single careless phrase. I smiled anyway, refusing to let the moment unravel me in front of everyone. This was the Ryan family holiday party, where smiles were masks, and patience was a currency I had long since exhausted. That night, as the house settled into an uneasy quiet, something inside me shifted. The weight of their indifference settled into a cold resolve. I pressed a button, figuratively and literally, that would change everything, because the Ryan way of just a mistake was about to meet a reckoning they never saw coming. Since I was a teenager, the role I played in our family was clear. I was the responsible one. While Lauren floated through life with a golden halo of favoritism, I was the shadow behind every crisis, the silent fixer nobody really acknowledged. From the time I was old enough to grasp the grim realities of our finances, I found myself drawn into the pattern. Dad would throw money at Lauren's schemes without a second thought, while my own concerns about bills or investments were met with dismissive shrugs. The difference was stark and painful. I remember vividly the night I first confronted Dad about the money he poured into Lauren's startups. I was 19, fresh out of college and proud of the small savings I'd managed to sock away from my part-time job. Lauren had just pitched another can't-miss idea, a boutique social media app she claimed would disrupt the market. Dad practically handed over a check without blinking. I nervously asked if some of that money could go toward the mounting credit card debt we were juggling. His response was a quick laugh, eyes narrowing with impatience. "Mavis, you worry too much. Lauren's future is bright. We'll sort the bills later." That was the first time I realized their version of responsibility didn't include me. Mom was no help. She had mastered the art of placating me with soft words and empty reassurances, her voice always laced with that weary kindness that kept the family's fragile peace intact. "Honey, family sticks together," she'd say, running a hand through my hair. "Sometimes, sacrifices have to be made for the greater good, but those sacrifices always seemed one-sided. I sacrificed time, money, and energy, while Lauren's endless ventures got a free pass. The math was simple, but the emotional calculus was devastating. Growing up, I often found myself juggling multiple roles: the unofficial family accountant who balanced checkbooks at midnight, the mediator who smoothed over arguments sparked by financial stress, the silent executor of unpaid bills no one else wanted to touch. I didn't mind. It felt like my duty. I believed that if I worked hard enough, if I stayed patient and steady, my family would eventually recognize my value. Maybe they'd finally see that love wasn't just about throwing money into risky ventures or covering up mistakes with a smile. Maybe one day they'd see me. But the pattern only deepened with time. Dad's favoritism was a constant undercurrent, obvious to anyone paying attention. He'd beam with pride, recounting Lauren's latest business pitch, speaking in tones that suggested unwavering faith in her success. Meanwhile, my requests for modest advances on household expenses, or a little financial breathing room, were met with procrastination or gentle rebukes. "We're stretched thin right now," Mom would say, her eyes darting away. "Just be patient, Mavis. Everything will work itself out." Lauren, for her part, seemed blissfully unaware, or perhaps indifferent, to the tension her privileged position created. She lived as if the family fortune was an endless reservoir, dipping in and out without a second thought. Invitations to expensive dinners, the newest gadgets, spontaneous trips, they were all gifts from Dad's generosity, a generosity he never extended to me. How could I compete with that kind of entitlement? No matter how many hours I logged at my demanding job or how carefully I managed our family's dwindling resources, I buried the resentment deep, convincing myself that this was just how families worked, that sometimes love meant being the steady rock everyone else leaned on but rarely thanked. I learned to smile through the dismissals, to nod politely when my concerns vanished into the background. I kept meticulous records, made sacrifices, and did the math nobody else wanted to face. And yet, the harder I tried to protect the family's fragile financial balance, the clearer it became that my efforts were invisible, unappreciated, and easily brushed aside. Looking back, I see the pattern now for what it was: a cycle of neglect disguised as loyalty, favoritism masquerading as support. Dad's investments in Lauren's ideas weren't just financial decisions, they were declarations of whose dreams mattered most. Mom's soothing words weren't comfort, they were a barricade against accountability. And me? I was the invisible caretaker, the unpaid protector of a family that expected my labor but refused to honor it. That's why I stayed silent for so long. Because speaking up felt like rocking a boat too fragile to float. Because I loved them, even when they broke me. Because I hoped, against all evidence, that someday the scales might tip, that the responsible daughter might finally be seen as more than just a safety net. But beneath that hope simmered a quiet storm, a growing awareness that some mistakes aren't accidents, and some patterns aren't going to change. The favoritism, the dismissals, the endless, just a mistake refrains, they were wounds that never healed. And as the years stacked up, so did the toll it took on my heart. That's the context behind this year's holiday party, the backdrop of years of overlooked sacrifices and unspoken grievances. Because when Dad laughed off another $150,000 loss as just a mistake, and Mom echoed that dismissal, it wasn't just carelessness. It was the culmination of a lifetime of unequal treatment. And that night, something inside me shifted in ways they couldn't yet imagine. I've given up promotions, worked extra hours, and lent the family tens of thousands to cover their debts. It's hard to confess out loud, but years ago I put my own ambitions on hold. Not because I wanted to, but because the Ryan family always seemed one step away from financial disaster. I was the one who stayed late at work, who double-checked every bill and reimbursement, who tracked every dollar spent in an Excel spreadsheet that I updated religiously. I sacrificed bonuses and leadership roles because I felt obligated to patch the leaks in our family's fragile financial boat. It wasn't just about the money, though. Time and again, I became the invisible thread holding everything together, making sure the lights stayed on and the mortgage got paid while everyone else went about their days. On paper, I had a successful career, but behind the scenes, I was also the family's bailout. When Dad's investments in Lauren's ventures went south, I quietly covered the shortfalls, knowing full well that those losses were never accounted for in our family conversations. When Lauren's latest project came around, she needed $150,000, a staggering amount, even for us. The idea was a new tech startup, something with a flashy pitch and a promise of quick returns. Dad was already excited, talking about how this would be the one that finally pays off. The way he described it made it sound like a sure thing. To him, it was just another adventure, another chance for Lauren to shine. But I saw it differently. I had crunched the numbers, reviewed the projections, and knew the risks were enormous. This wasn't just a gamble. It was reckless. Daniel was the first to speak up. "Mavis, you don't have to do this," he said quietly one evening, as we sat at the kitchen table, bills spread out between us. "You've already given so much. Maybe it's time to say no." His voice was gentle, but there was an edge of urgency I hadn't heard before. I looked at the figures again. The endless stream of payments I'd made to cover family debts and keep Lauren's projects afloat. I wanted to believe that this time would be different, that Lauren's latest idea would finally succeed, and everyone would appreciate what I'd done. But when I told Dad I couldn't lend the money this time, he scoffed. His smirk was cold, like I was betraying the family by refusing to finance another of Lauren's schemes. Mom predictably took his side, her voice soft but firm. "It's just a small setback, Mavis. We have to stick together." Their words felt like a wall closing in on me. Yet, I paid the other bills, managed the taxes, and cared for the aging relatives without a single word of thanks. I stayed silent because I believed love meant sacrifice, that my efforts were the glue keeping this family from falling apart. At work, I buried myself deeper into projects, taking on extra shifts to cover the financial strain. I told myself the sacrifices were temporary, that one day the family would acknowledge my value, that Lauren would grow into the success Dad predicted, and that the endless support would pay off in some intangible way. The nights I spent poring over spreadsheets were not just about numbers. They were about maintaining the fragile illusion that the Ryan family could survive without completely unraveling. But deep inside, I felt the sting of invisibility. The countless hours I logged, the money I lent, the care I gave, it all seemed to disappear into the background, overshadowed by the spotlight shining on Lauren. She had the freedom to dream wildly, to risk everything without consequence, backed by Dad's unwavering confidence. Meanwhile, my steady, quiet contributions were met with polite nods or worse, impatience. It was as if my value was measured only by the risks I was willing to take, not the quiet strength I provided. I held on to hope, though, a fragile thread woven from years of endurance. Maybe, just maybe, this holiday season would be different. Maybe this time, the family would see me not as the background fixer, but as someone who deserved respect and recognition. I told myself to be patient, to keep giving, keep covering, keep sacrificing, because that's what family did. But when Dad chuckled off the $150,000 lost as just a mistake, and Mom quickly agreed, calling it an accident, that hope began to crack. Their dismissive words didn't just deny the money lost. They denied everything I had done to keep the family afloat. I refused to cover the cost again, not because I was unloving, but because I was tired. Tired of being invisible. Tired of being expected to absorb their recklessness without a single acknowledgement. In that moment, I realized how deeply entrenched the pattern was. My sacrifices weren't appreciated. They were taken for granted. My worth was measured only by what I could give, never by who I was. The love I believed in was conditional, wrapped up in expectations that I would always be the one to fix things quietly, without complaint. That night, as the party noise faded and the house grew still, I made a decision. I wouldn't keep sacrificing in silence anymore. I wouldn't keep pretending that this was just a small setback, or just a mistake. I had given everything I could, and now it was time to protect myself. The quiet foundation I'd built for the family was about to be tested in a way none of them expected. At the holiday party, the house was alive with the usual hum of chatter and laughter, the kind that fills rooms but rarely fills the gaps between people. I stood near the fireplace, clutching my glass of wine a little too tightly, my smile practiced but brittle. Dad was in his element, front and center, spinning the story of Lauren's latest venture like it was the headline of the evening. The way he spoke, you'd think she was about to revolutionize the industry overnight. $150,000. He boomed, his voice oozing with pride and certainty. That's the stake I put in Lauren's new project. You mark my words, this one's going to pay off. He laughed, the kind of laugh that didn't quite reach his eyes. The room followed suit with polite chuckles, as if that money was nothing more than spare change tossed into the wind. But I knew better. That figure wasn't just a number. It was a weight, a burden I had been quietly carrying for years. I caught Mom's eye across the room. Her smile was tight, rehearsed. She floated over to Dad, smoothing the edges of his talk with a gentle, "It's just a mistake, dear. We all make them." Her voice was soft but firm, like a shield meant to protect fragile egos rather than confront hard truths. The phrase echoed in the room, light and dismissive. But for me, it was a dagger, just a mistake. Like losing $150,000 was somehow trivial. Like the countless sacrifices I had made to keep our family afloat were nothing but background noise to their grand narratives. I felt the familiar tightening in my chest, the sting of invisibility that had been a steady companion for as long as I could remember. Here I was, the one who balanced the books late into the night, the one who patched holes in our finances no one wanted to talk about. And now, their casual dismissal of such a significant loss was a slap in the face. I swallowed the bitterness, forcing my lips into a smile that didn't reach my eyes. "Maybe next time we'll be more careful," Dad joked, his tone light but laced with that same careless confidence. It was as if the money simply vanished into thin air, a cost of doing business, or worse, a family tradition. No apology, no accountability, just the expectation that I would quietly absorb the fallout, as I always had. I wanted to speak up, to tell them how unfair it was, to demand recognition for the years of unseen labor I had invested. But the words stuck in my throat. I had learned long ago that confrontation at these gatherings only deepened the divides. So, I stayed silent, nodding along, pretending the cold ache in my chest was just holiday stress. Daniel caught my eye briefly. A flicker of sympathy there, but even he seemed resigned. He knows how this script plays out every year. The family rallies around the golden child, brushing off the rest of us as mere collateral damage. I took a slow sip of wine, the tang sharp against my tongue, grounding me as the evening spiraled on. The guests moved on to other topics, laughter rising again, but I felt a shift inside me, a quiet but fierce resolve hardening beneath the surface. I realized that their version of family meant forgetting, excusing, and expecting me to be the safety net without complaint. That smile I wore was a mask, and beneath it, something brittle was beginning to crack. Mom's voice floated back across the room, a final soft dismissal. "It's only an accident, Mavis. Don't let it get to you." Her words were meant to soothe, but they felt like a verdict passed down without a trial. I forced down the lump in my throat and nodded, but inside the knot tightened. The party continued around me like a slow-moving current, but I was already drifting, pulled by a new current of conviction. That night, under the twinkling lights and forced cheer, I made a choice. I would no longer be the invisible accountant of their recklessness, their laughter, their casual dismissals, their "just a mistake." Those words were no longer enough to keep me silent. Because some mistakes aren't mistakes at all. They're patterns. Patterns I was done carrying alone. Later that night, after the last guests had trickled out and the house settled into an uneasy stillness, I went back to the kitchen to grab a glass of water. The silence was thick, heavier somehow than the usual post-party lull. My footsteps echoed softly against the tile as I made my way to the sink, and that's when I saw it. There, lying half submerged, was the family tablet. The screen was cracked, the edges fogged with water droplets, and the surface glistened with a thin film of soapy residue. My breath caught in my throat. This wasn't just any tablet. It was the device where I kept the master budget spreadsheet, the meticulous ledger that tracked every dollar flowing in and out of the Ryan family accounts. Years of work, countless late nights, carefully calibrated formulas, and now, ruined. I knelt down, fingertips trembling as I reached for the device. The screen flickered weakly, but the damage was clear. The data was gone, the files corrupted beyond repair. I traced my finger over the screen, the cold glass slick under my touch, the reality sinking in like icy water. "Dad?" I called softly, my voice breaking the quiet like a crack in the fragile calm. He emerged from the living room, rubbing his hands on his trousers, a sheepish grin plastered on his face. "Hey, Mavis. What's wrong?" I held up the tablet, my eyes locking onto his. "Did you—" I hesitated, searching for words I didn't want to say. "Did you knock this into the sink?" He shrugged, his grin fading just a bit. "Yeah, I guess I did. It was an accident. Don't make a big deal out of it. An accident." Those two words echoed again, the same dismissive phrase from earlier, like a refrain in a song I was tired of hearing. My throat tightened. I swallowed hard, fighting back the surge of frustration threatening to spill over. "This tablet has every budget, every bill, every payment I manage for this family," I said quietly, my voice steady despite the turmoil inside. "Those spreadsheets took months to build. Years, really. And now it's ruined." Dad's eyes flickered with a mix of guilt and impatience. "It's no big deal, Mavis. We can just get a new one. You always have backups, right?" I wanted to believe him, to accept the easy fix of replacing hardware. But deep down, I knew it wasn't just about the tablet. It was about what it represented. The countless hours I spent behind the scenes, keeping this family afloat while they treated my work like a disposable tool. Before I could respond, Mom appeared in the doorway, her face pale but composed. "Mavis, darling," she said softly, "it really was just an accident. We all make mistakes, and honestly, it's not worth losing sleep over. Let it go." Her words landed like a soft command, designed to shut down any objection. I felt the weight of her gaze, the way it sought to smooth the edges of conflict rather than confront it. But something inside me snapped. I looked from the tablet to their faces, their casual dismissal, their refusal to acknowledge the deeper damage beneath the surface. This wasn't about a broken device anymore. It was about respect, accountability, recognition. Their indifference was a fracture line cutting through everything I'd worked for, the silent labor that held the Ryan family together. They saw me as the backdrop, the fixer, the one who absorbed their mistakes without complaint. And tonight, after the laughter faded and the holiday lights dimmed, I finally saw it clearly. They never valued me. Not really. The bitter truth settled over me like a cold fog. Their careless words, their laughter, and now this. With every slight and shrug, they expected me to pick up the pieces, to fix what they shattered without so much as a thank you. But I was done. I folded my arms, steadying my breath. "This isn't just a mistake," I said, voice low but firm. "It's the last straw." Dad opened his mouth, perhaps to protest, but the words caught in the air because, for once, I wasn't smiling to cover the hurt. I was quiet, but inside, A frozen resolve took root. Mom's lips pressed into a thin line, and she nodded slowly, as if conceding some small, unspoken battlefield. The house felt colder now, shadows lengthening in the corners as if the night itself was holding its breath. That ruined tablet on the kitchen counter wasn't just a device destroyed. It was a symbol, an emblem of years of overlooked efforts, of sacrifices dismissed, of a family that expected me to carry its burdens without ever giving back. And tonight, something inside me shifted. The lines had been drawn, because some mistakes, they're not accidents at all. They're the beginning of reckoning. That night, long after the last car pulled away and the house was swallowed by silence, I lay awake in the dark, the ceiling above me stretching endlessly like the weight pressing down on my chest. The events of the evening spun relentlessly through my mind. Infinite replays of Dad's careless laughter, Mom's soft dismissals, and the cold smirk that curled on Dad's lips the moment I refused to back another reckless gamble. But beneath those surface moments was a deeper, heavier reckoning. The slow unspooling of years spent holding a family together that never truly held me. I thought about the debts I had quietly shouldered, the tens of thousands I lent to patch over Lauren's faltering projects. Not just money, but emotional labor. Countless hours spent calming nerves, smoothing over tensions, and balancing numbers no one else wanted to face. I saw the late nights hunched over spreadsheets, the painstaking efforts to forecast and salvage what little stability I could grasp. I remembered the silent sacrifices, jobs turned down, promotions passed over, because I was too tied up patching their holes to chase my own dreams. The ache of invisibility was a familiar, gnawing companion. I remembered the countless times my contributions were ignored or minimized, my concerns turned into overreactions or unnecessary worries. I had given everything, time, energy, love, only to be met with polite nods or worse, outright dismissal. The phrase "just a mistake" echoed relentlessly in my mind, a cruel mantra masking the reality that their recklessness was never accidental, but a pattern, a repeated breach of trust disguised as casual error. Grief mingled with fury. I grieved the daughter I thought I was, the one who believed that love meant sacrifice, who clung stubbornly to hope that family loyalty would one day be mutual. And with that, grief came anger, cold, sharp, and steady, at the blind favoritism that always placed Lauren in the spotlight while I remained the shadow in the background. The anger wasn't explosive, it was a hardening, a crystallization of all the years I had been expected to absorb their failures and carry their burdens without complaint. I realized they thrived on my generosity, on my willingness to forgive and forget, to cover for their carelessness. Their mistakes weren't accidents at all. They were entitlement in disguise, a pattern of expecting me to be the family's invisible bailout, a safety net without voice or boundary. They never saw me as more than the woman who could fix their problems, who could bear the weight of their missteps with quiet endurance. My worth was measured only by the size of my sacrifice, never by who I was beneath it. As I lay there, the silence in the house pressing close, I made a decision. The old Mavis, the patient, the forgiving, the silent fixer, was done. I would no longer be the repository for their mistakes, the family ghost who vanished when recognition was needed. I told myself firmly, they will never change. I owe them nothing. For the first time in years, I felt a fierce clarity, a cold, unyielding resolve that steadied my breath and sharpened my mind. This was no longer about money, or broken tablets, or failed projects. It was about respect, something I had long been denied, something I would no longer beg for or quietly surrender. Tomorrow, I would begin a reckoning, a careful, deliberate unspooling of the safety net I had woven so tightly around them for years. I would let them see the consequences of their entitlement, and I would protect myself from the heartbreak of invisibility. The night stretched on, but inside me, a quiet revolution was already underway. The Ryan family's version of just a mistake had met its match, and the next chapter was about to begin. That night, as sleep evaded me and the house finally settled into its usual stillness, I found myself wide awake, thoughts spinning relentlessly through my mind. The laughter from the party had long faded, but the echoes of Dad's careless phrases and Mom's dismissive reassurances still haunted the corners of my consciousness. I felt the weight of years pressing down, heavier than any burden I'd ever carried. Years spent silently absorbing their mistakes, years of being their invisible safety net. I reached for my laptop, the glow of the screen harsh in the dark, and began to map out the full extent of the financial ties that bound us. It wasn't a complicated puzzle to piece together. After all, I'd been the one maintaining every account, tracking every transaction, authorizing payments and balancing budgets. I was the quiet architect of the family's financial network, the one holding the strings behind the scenes. The truth laid bare on my spreadsheets. I controlled all of it. The auto payments that kept the mortgage alive, the utility bills that kept the lights on, the credit cards swiped for everything from groceries to Lauren's extravagant whims, the car insurance policies, the family cell phone plans, even the streaming services everyone took for granted, all linked through accounts I managed. Every monthly deduction, every bank transfer, every recurring expense ran through my hands, like a lifeline I was expected to never let go. As I scrolled through the numbers, I felt a familiar pang of exhaustion mixed with cold clarity. For years, I'd been the backstop for their recklessness, the silent guarantor for their careless spending, the one who made sure none of it spiraled completely out of control. And yet, when the stakes were high, when Lauren's latest venture lost $150,000, they laughed it off as just a mistake, expecting me to absorb the shock again. They never paused to consider the toll it took on me, financially, emotionally, mentally. I opened a fresh document and began to list one by one every favor I had extended, every loan I had quietly covered, every warning I had issued only to be ignored. It was a catalog of invisible debts, money lent without contracts or interest, time given without acknowledgement, sacrifices made in silence. There were the emergency payments I'd made to keep the family afloat when bills went overdue, the credit card balances I'd paid down to prevent penalties, the insurance premiums I'd pushed through so the family cars wouldn't be repossessed. My finger hovered over the keys as I typed out dollar amounts that, when added together, reached 5 figures, a conservative estimate of how much I had poured into their ventures and bills without so much as a thank you. But it wasn't just about the money. It was about the pattern, the way their entitlement had been nurtured by my patience, how each just a mistake emboldened them to expect more, to take more, to give less. I thought about Dad's smirk when I refused to invest in Lauren's latest project, his amusement at what he called my overreaction. I thought about Mom's gentle but firm insistence that I let it go, that family sticks together no matter what. The words echoed in my mind like a mantra that masked the truth. They had never truly respected me, never really valued the labor I'd poured into holding the family together. Reaching out in the dark, I pulled a file from my desk drawer, a sheaf of printed bank statements, credit card bills, insurance statements, account summaries. I had kept these meticulously, anticipating that someday I might need to prove my worth, to make a case for myself. Tonight felt like that night. The weight of invisibility was suffocating, and I needed a clear plan. I called Daniel softly, careful not to wake him. His voice was steady on the other end, full of quiet encouragement. We talked in whispered tones about what I could do, not out of spite, but out of necessary self-preservation. He reminded me that I had the power here, that I controlled the accounts, the passwords, the auto payments. "You're the one holding all the keys," he said. "You can decide where this family goes from here." It was a strange kind of relief to hear him say that, a lifeline thrown into the stormy waters of my thoughts. For so long, I had been the silent servant, the family's invisible accountant, the woman who fixed crises without complaint. But now, I was beginning to see that I didn't have to be a silent martyr anymore. I had the power to set boundaries, to demand respect, to make them face the consequences of their own choices. I spent the night drafting lists, updating passwords, jotting down notes about which accounts could be frozen, which payments could be halted without immediate harm, and which services could be cut off first to send a clear message. The calm, analytical part of me, the financial analyst who thrived on strategy and precision, took over. Emotions were filed away for later. replaced by spreadsheets and timelines. I realized that I didn't have to announce my plans. The shock would come in the morning, when the first payments were declined and the family's financial safety net slowly unraveled. I planned to leave a note, short, ambiguous, almost mocking in its understatement. Just a small error. It felt like a subtle declaration, a way to mirror back their own dismissive words. As dawn crept in, painting the sky in pale blues and golds, I closed my laptop with a sense of quiet finality. This was no longer about sacrifice or hope. This was about self-respect and survival. I was done absorbing their mistakes. Tomorrow they would see the cost of their entitlement, and I would finally be free to protect myself. The wheels were set in motion, and there was no turning back. That night, after everyone had left and the house had finally slipped into silence, I sat alone at the kitchen table. The low hum of the refrigerator was the only sound, a steady reminder of how quiet the world could be when all the noise was stripped away. For once, the chaotic energy of the Ryan family gathering had dissipated, leaving just the cold, still air to fill the spaces between my thoughts. I opened my laptop and pulled up the master spreadsheet, the same one I had spent years building, tweaking and updating in the quiet hours when everyone else was asleep or too distracted to care. It was the ledger of my life's work for this family. Every bill, every payment, every loan, and every single auto-pay set up to keep this fragile financial ecosystem from collapsing. I traced my finger along the columns, the numbers blurring slightly through the sleepless haze. Tonight, my mind was different. The usual exhaustion was replaced by a sharp, calculating clarity. I wasn't just keeping the books anymore. I was planning the first moves in a game that no one expected me to play. I began methodically canceling every autopay linked to their accounts. Mortgage, utilities, insurance premiums, credit card bills. They all went into a digital void where payments would no longer automatically clear. I watched as the confirmations blinked on my screen, a quiet form of rebellion taking shape in real time. Each canceled transaction was a deliberate step away from the burden I had carried for so long. Next, I froze the credit cards tied to the family accounts. Cards that had been swiped without a second thought for dinners, trips, and the endless stream of urgent investments Lauren pitched. I knew that freezing them would cause immediate frustration, but that was the point. Finally, the consequences of their reckless spending would ripple through the household like a shockwave. Then came the family plans, the cell phones, the streaming subscriptions, everything shared under the guise of belonging to a family. I removed them all. The accounts, tied to my name and managed through my credentials, were no longer theirs to use freely. It was a gesture that felt small but heavy with symbolism. No more free rides, no more invisible support. But that wasn't all. I spent hours updating passwords, locking down access to everything from bank apps to insurance portals. Each new password was a barrier, a line drawn in the digital sand. I thought about the snide smirk Dad wore when he laughed off the investment loss as just a mistake, and Mom's soothing, dismissive tones. Their words had ignited a fire I couldn't put out with silence or sacrifice. I left the family tablet, the one Dad had drowned in the sink earlier that night, on the kitchen counter as a quiet monument to broken trust. Then, before retreating upstairs to bed, I wrote a note and placed it neatly next to the tablet on the polished wooden surface. The note was brief, almost understated in its cold simplicity. Just a small error. It was a mirror held up to their own dismissive phrases, a subtle but unambiguous message that things had changed. No apologies, no explanations, just a fact they couldn't ignore. I climbed the stairs slowly, the weight of what I had done settling deep in my chest. The house was dark now, the only light coming from the distant street lamp outside filtering through the curtains. I paused at the top of the stairs and looked back down at the kitchen, empty, silent, but charged with the quiet electricity of a reckoning about to begin. As I lay in bed, eyes open and mind racing, I imagined the morning that awaited us all. The first auto payments would decline. The credit cards would be frozen with no warning. Phones would lose service. Bills would pile up unanswered. The Ryans, who had long taken my efforts for granted, would finally feel the sting of consequence. I felt no triumph, only a cold, steady resolve. This was about respect, boundaries, and finally protecting myself. The quiet house seemed to acknowledge the shift. Somewhere deep inside, I knew this night was the turning point. The Ryan family's comfortable cycle of just a mistake had met its match, and tomorrow, everything would begin to unravel. By midday, the silence I had orchestrated turned into a tangible tension spreading through the Ryan household like a cold wave. The first signs were subtle: an unanswered call here, a confused glance there. But soon, the consequences of my quiet rebellion began to roar. The mortgage payment, which always went through on the first of the month without fail, bounced back. The confirmation email landed in my inbox, a sterile notification of failure that felt like a small victory carved out of years of being overlooked. The phone line went dead. No cheerful ringtone, no casual texts from Lauren asking for the next round of funding. I watched the utilities one by one flicker off. Electricity, water, internet. Each cut off a clear signal that the safety net I had woven was unraveling. The house, usually humming with the comforting buzz of everyday life, grew oddly still and cold. Lauren's glossy new gadgets suddenly went silent. Screens dark and unresponsive like the fortunes they promised but never delivered. It wasn't chaos yet. At least not in the way my family was used to. There were no shouting matches or dramatic confrontations just yet. Instead, the tension simmered beneath the surface, a quiet storm building as they grappled with the reality that the financial leash they had so carelessly pulled on for years had snapped. I sat at my desk, deliberately distant from the unfolding confusion, my fingers poised above the keyboard. It was time to make my position unmistakably clear. I composed an email, each word carefully measured, stripped of emotion but heavy with finality. The subject line was blunt: setting boundaries. Inside, I outlined what had become painfully apparent. I was no longer willing, nor able, to be the family's financial safety net. I detailed the years I had quietly funded their ventures, the late-night bailouts, the unpaid debts I had absorbed without complaint. But now, the pattern had to end. Lauren's projects are no longer my responsibility, I wrote, nor are the unpaid bills or forgotten payments that have become routine excuses. This is not punishment or bitterness. It is a necessary boundary for my own well-being. I will no longer cover losses or fund ventures that have repeatedly failed to honor their commitments. I hit send, feeling a strange mixture of relief and apprehension. I knew the message would hit hard. For years, they had thrived on my silence, on my willingness to step in and fix their mistakes without question. Now, that cushion was gone. Minutes later, as expected, the first replies trickled in. Dad's email was defensive, layered with thinly veiled blame. "You're overreacting, Mavis. Family sticks together, and sometimes sacrifices are necessary." The words echoed the same tired refrain I'd heard for years, but this time, I wasn't listening. Mom's message was softer but equally dismissive. "We never meant to take your generosity for granted. We're sorry if you feel hurt, but it's just how things are. Please understand." I recognized the old script, the disarming apologies that demanded forgiveness without change. Lauren's response was a mixture of shock and entitlement. "I can't believe you'd do this to us. After everything I've done for this family, this is how you repay me?" Her tone was accusatory, but beneath it, I sensed fear, the sudden loss of the financial cushion she had come to rely on. Their emails arrived one after another, a flood of calls soon following, Dad's voice cracking between anger and pleading, Mom's quiet attempts to soothe, Lauren's frantic demands for money. But I stayed firm, my replies curt, yet calm. I refused to engage in the familiar cycle of guilt and manipulation. The boundaries were set, and I would not back down. The community around us began to sense the fracture. Family friends reached out with tentative questions. Rumors started to swirl about the Ryan family's sudden financial troubles, about strained relationships and the fallout from years of unchecked favoritism. The facade of unity was cracking, exposing the long-hidden tensions beneath. Lauren, once untouchable in her role as the golden child, faltered without the invisible safety net. Her latest project lost momentum, investors growing wary as payments ceased and promises went unfulfilled. The confidence that had defined her presence within the family dimmed, replaced by uncertainty and desperation. Yet, amidst the chaos and confrontation, I found an unexpected clarity. For the first time, I was no longer invisible. I was seen, not as the silent fixer, but as someone with limits, someone who demanded respect and fairness. This new dynamic unsettled the family deeply. The delicate balance of power shifted as they were forced to reckon with the consequences of their reckless choices. And though the days ahead promised more challenges, I knew that I had taken the crucial first step in reclaiming my worth and protecting my future. But the story was far from over. The unraveling had begun, and the Ryan family would have to face what it truly meant to live with the cost of their just a mistake. The morning light filtered through the curtains, soft and innocent, belying the storm that was about to break. My phone buzzed relentlessly on the nightstand, each ring a sharp echo against the quiet of our bedroom. I glanced over at the screen. Dad, flashing repeatedly. I let it go to voicemail. Then came Mom's number, then Lauren's. The calls didn't stop. They came in waves, relentless, urgent. The flood of voices on the other end was desperate, pleading, suffocating. Dad's voice trembled first, a brittle blend of frustration and disbelief. Mavis, what is this? I don't understand. The payments. Everything stopped. You've got to fix this. It's a mistake, right? Just a glitch in the system. His tone cracked. The veneer of his usual arrogance replaced by something rawer, more vulnerable. I never meant to hurt anyone. You have to know that. I felt the weight of years behind that one phrase. His excuse. His shield. But this time, I was unmoved. I didn't answer. Instead, I let the voicemail fill with his words, the echoes of a man suddenly confronted by consequences he'd long ignored. The next call was Mom, softer but no less urgent. Her voice was trembling with a kind of fragile sorrow. Mavis, please, we're sorry. I'm sorry. You know it was never personal. We just wanted to keep the family together, to protect each other. Please forgive us. Her words were a litany of regret and pleading, but beneath them lay the familiar undercurrent of deflection, the silent message that I should simply let it go, move past this storm, make amends by forgetting. I stayed silent again, listening, but not responding. I couldn't. This wasn't about forgiveness anymore. This was about boundaries, about respect, about the long overdue reckoning for years of neglect disguised as love. Lauren's call was different, her voice a volatile mix of anger and panic. Mavis, what the hell? You can't do this. You're ruining everything. How could you just cut us off like this? After all I've done, you're betraying the family. Her words thundered through the line, the entitlement behind them raw and exposed. But beneath her anger, I sensed fear. Fear of losing the financial lifeline she'd taken for granted for so long. Daniel sat beside me on the bed, his presence steady and calm amid the chaos unfolding on my phone. He watched without judgment as the calls stacked up, each one a test of my resolve. You're doing the right thing, he said quietly, his voice a soothing anchor. They need to see the consequences. They've never respected your generosity because it was unlimited. Now it's not. The barrage didn't stop there. Calls blended into texts. Emails poured in with carefully crafted apologies and veiled threats. Dad's messages tried to guilt me back into compliance, reminding me of family loyalty and the sacrifices we all make. Mom's emails softened the edges, full of sorrow and promises to change, words I had heard 1,000 times before. Lauren's messages fluctuated between entitlement, manipulation, and desperate pleas for support. Each message chipped away at the fragile illusion of family harmony, but I held firm, responding only with clear, measured words. I have set these boundaries because I must protect myself. I will no longer be the financial safety net that enables reckless behavior. This is not punishment. It is self-preservation. Outside the confines of our home, the ripple effect began. Family friends whispered in hushed tones at community gatherings. The once unshakable image of the Ryans as a united, thriving clan began to crack. People who had long admired the family's facade sensed the shift, heard the undercurrents of tension woven into the carefully curated social veneer. Lauren's confidence wavered visibly. At first, she tried to maintain her usual charm and poise, but as her projects stalled and investors expressed concern, cracks appeared. Friends and acquaintances who had once envied her lifestyle now whispered about the family's financial troubles. Without the invisible safety net I had provided, the golden child stumbled, exposed. At home, the atmosphere grew heavy with unspoken tension. Daniel noticed the change too, how the house, once filled with casual noise and easy banter, now bore the weight of uncertainty. Yet, amid the chaos, I felt a strange sense of clarity, a hard-won peace. I was no longer invisible. I was no longer the silent fixer who absorbed the fallout. I was a woman standing firm, demanding respect and fairness. But the storm was far from over. The calls and messages were just the first wave of a reckoning that would test us all. The Ryans, once secure in their unchecked entitlement, were forced to confront the reality that their just a mistake no longer had the luxury of dismissal. The boundaries I set were lines firmly drawn in the sand, lines they would have to respect if there was any hope of rebuilding trust. As I turned off my phone and settled into the quiet, I knew one thing for certain. The family I once tried to hold together was unraveling before my eyes, and while the days ahead promised struggle and conflict, I stood ready, no longer a silent martyr, but a woman reclaiming her power, her worth, and her peace. Weeks slipped by like slow-moving shadows across the calendar, each day etching the consequences of that quiet, calculated night deeper into the fabric of our family's reality. The paper trail I left, the canceled payments, frozen cards, and severed lines of credit, was no longer just numbers on a screen. It had become a fracture that rippled outward, shaking the Ryans' world in ways none of us could have ignored. The first real sign of the unraveling came in the form of a thick envelope that landed on the doorstep, its contents a grim reminder: foreclosure notices. The house, the one I had fought so hard to keep afloat for years, suddenly teetered on the edge of losing its roof. I held the letter in my hands, the official stamps and legal jargon feeling like a cold accusation. Years of unpaid or delayed payments, sometimes covered by me, sometimes intentionally left to accumulate, were now reaching a breaking point. The facade of stability was cracking, and the reality was harsh. Their reckless spending and my withdrawal of financial support had pushed us to the brink. Lauren's world began to crumble alongside it. Her latest startup, once gleaming with promise and buoyed by Dad's blind faith, stalled almost overnight. Investors backed away silently, their patience exhausted by missed payments and unreturned calls. The once bright sparkle in Lauren's eyes dimmed as the fragile illusion of success faded. Gone was the confident golden girl who strode through life expecting doors to open. In her place was a desperate woman scrambling to patch holes in sinking ships. But the fallout didn't stop with financial losses. Our family's reputation, the carefully cultivated image presented at community events, church gatherings, and neighborhood socials, started to unravel. Whispers and sideways glances replaced the polite smiles. Old friends who once admired the Ryans' apparent prosperity now glanced at us with a mixture of pity and suspicion. Invitations to dinners and fundraisers quietly dried up. The unspoken message was clear: the Ryans were no longer untouchable. Faced with this mounting pressure, Dad, Mom, and Lauren each scrambled to regain control. But their strategies only deepened the cracks. Dad reverted to an old tactic: playing the victim. His phone calls were filled with shaky frustration and wounded pride. "This isn't how it was supposed to be," he'd say, voice thick with disbelief, as if the consequences were a cruel twist of fate rather than the direct result of his choices. He painted himself as a man undone by circumstance, not by his own recklessness. Mom's approach was more subtle but just as calculated. She flooded my inbox with carefully worded emails brimming with remorse and promises to change. "We never meant to take your generosity for granted," she wrote. "Please, Mavis, understand that family is everything to us." Her words tried to weave a tapestry of regret and hope, but beneath the surface lay an unspoken plea: forgive us and return to the way things were. Yet her apologies felt hollow, rehearsed, and lacking the real accountability I needed. Lauren, sensing the shifting tides, oscillated between entitlement and desperation. One day, she would accuse me of betrayal with sharp words and icy disdain. The next, her voice cracked with panic, begging for just one more chance, one more loan to keep her dreams alive. She was unraveling in real time, her confidence shattered by the sudden absence of financial shelter I once provided. Each failed pitch, each investor withdrawal, each halted payment was a stark reminder that the golden child's safety net had vanished. Family, friends, and acquaintances began to pick sides, their whispered opinions spreading like wildfire through social circles. Some expressed sympathy for Dad's hard luck, while others questioned the Ryans' long-standing pattern of dependence and denial. The community was no longer willing to look the other way. The image of a united, thriving family was cracking, exposing the raw, complicated truth beneath. Within the household, the atmosphere grew heavier with each passing day. The easy conversations and laughter that once filled the rooms were replaced by tense silences and guarded exchanges. Daniel noticed the shift too. The way my shoulders straightened, my voice softened but hardened all at once. I was no longer the invisible fixer absorbing the family's chaos. I was a woman standing firm on the ground I'd claimed. Despite the turmoil, I found a strange clarity amid the storm. The pain of watching my family fracture was real, but the relief of setting boundaries was even stronger. For the first time in years, I felt seen, not as a tool or a safety net, but as a person with limits and dignity. The Ryans were finally facing the cost of their just a mistake attitude, and it was painful for all of us. There were attempts to regroup, pleas for meetings, proposed counseling, even threats of legal action from some relatives who wanted to mediate or intervene. I documented every interaction, knowing that accountability required evidence as much as resolve. Some family members reached out with genuine remorse, acknowledging the harm that had long been ignored. Others doubled down on blame, accusing me of betrayal or cruelty. The divisions within the family became clearer, no longer hidden behind polite holiday smiles. The community's perception of us hung on a knife's edge. Invitations remained scarce, conversations awkward, support fragile. The Ryan family's image as a seamless unit had fractured, replaced by a mosaic of fractured relationships, unhealed wounds, and difficult truths. And yet, despite the pain and uncertainty, I knew this unraveling was necessary. The comfortable patterns of entitlement and neglect could no longer survive in the harsh light of truth. The Ryans faced a choice: grow beyond their past, or remain trapped in the cycle of denial and blame. As the weeks wore on, I remained steady, no longer the silent martyr, but a woman who had reclaimed her voice and her boundaries. The storm was far from over, but the foundation of respect and fairness I demanded was no longer negotiable. The Ryan family, fractured and vulnerable, stood at a crossroads, and for the first time in a long time, I was ready to walk my own path, free from the shadows of just a mistake. The days that followed were heavy with a reluctant acceptance. The family, battered by the sudden silence of their financial safety net, had no choice but to confront the reality I had forced upon them. Dad's usual bravado was tempered now, his sharp words replaced by a guarded, almost grudging respect. Mom stopped dismissing my feelings as mere overreaction and began to tread carefully around the boundaries I had drawn. Lauren's once unshakable confidence cracked under the weight of consequences she hadn't anticipated. It was as if the Ryan family had been forced out of a dreamscape where money flowed without question, and mistakes could be laughed off with a wave of a hand. Now, they stood face to face with the very real cost of their assumptions, that my generosity and patience were endless, that I would always absorb their recklessness without complaint. I made it clear to them all: no more bailouts, no more excuses cloaked in family loyalty. Respect, honesty, and equality were now the only currency that mattered in our relationships. These weren't empty demands. They were firm lines drawn after years of being invisible, after countless sacrifices that went unrecognized. For the first time in forever, the terms were mine to set, and I set them with unwavering resolve. At home, I chose a new kind of peace, one that Daniel and our children have helped me nurture. Our life became a sanctuary, a a refuge from the tumult that still simmered beyond our front door. The hours I once spent patching family financial holes were now dedicated to us, to building a future where respect and reciprocity were not optional. I began attending fewer family gatherings, not out of spite, but because I recognized the importance of protecting my emotional well-being. It wasn't easy. The pull of old patterns, the yearning for approval, still lingered, but I held firm. I refused to lose myself again in a cycle that demanded more than I was willing to give without return. The Ryan family, shaken and uncertain, had to grapple with the fallout. Some days, the silence was thick between us, a reminder of the fractures that had long been ignored. Other times, conversations emerged, tentative steps toward a new dynamic grounded in mutual respect. These moments were fragile, but hopeful. I realized that blood alone does not guarantee respect or love. Those must be earned, nurtured, and fiercely protected. My worth was not measured by how much I gave or how quietly I carried burdens. It was measured by my courage to say no, to set boundaries, and to reclaim my dignity. The shift was not immediate, nor was it complete. Healing is a slow process, and the scars of just a mistake lingered like shadows in the corners of family history. But I stood firm in my conviction that the old ways could no longer hold. For myself, for Daniel, and for our children, I claimed a new freedom from expectation, from invisibility, from being the silent fixer. I chose peace over approval, authenticity over sacrifice, and respect over neglect. The Ryan family faces their choices now, whether to grow into a more honest, equal future, or to remain trapped in the cycles that fractured us. My message, quietly but clearly, is that respect is not owed by blood alone. It is earned through accountability, honesty, and care. And in reclaiming my worth and freedom, I found something I'd been searching for all along: the courage to be seen, not just as a daughter, a sister, or a fixer, but as a woman who will no longer be invisible.